Hello class. We will be starting our algebra unit today. Who here is familiar with algebra or any algebraic equations or expressions? Raise your hand. Okay, so one, two of you guys. Well, that is why you guys are all here, so that we can learn about algebra, you can learn about algebraic equations and expressions, and then be able to eventually apply them to real life. So to begin today's lesson, I would like to just first look at the objectives and foreshadow what is to come for this particular lesson. The algebra as a unit will be broken up into individual lessons that will target individual goals, skill sets that you will hopefully be learning and able to apply to each new thing that you are thrown into. So let's begin with just some of the objectives. Now, I know it's a little wordy, so take what I say with a grain of salt because things are obviously subject to change. So we will be discussing the operations of associative and commutative property. So those are two terms that you will know by the end of the unit. We will be expressing multiplication and addition using the associative and commutative property. We will do that in addition, no pun intended, with subtraction equations with associative and commutative properties. And then we will perform these operations with integers. Now, does anybody here know what an integer is? Okay. An integer is pretty much any numerical value. Integers can be whole numbers, they can be decimals, fractions, then there are specific terms for whole number integers and that type of thing. That's just a little overview of what you guys will be looking forward to in this lesson. But let's first start with the basics. So, does anybody know what PEMDAS is? Let's see, PEMDAS. Okay, so who would like to take a guess at what the P stands for? Just a little review. You guys have definitely heard of PEMDAS before. Okay, so the P stands for parentheses. So anything, any numerical value that you see in parentheses would be the P in PEMDAS. So say, for example, we have a 4. That would represent the P in PEMDAS. You would take a look at the 4 that is located in parentheses. Does anybody know what the E stands for? Okay, so the E in PEMDAS stands for exponents. So if you were given a 4 with a 2, let's try that again. You were given a 4 with a 2, that would stand, the 2 would be the exponent. Does anybody know how to pronounce the 4 with a little 2 in the corner? Yes, very good. 4 to the second power. Does anybody know what that value is? It's kind of a tough question. So it's not 4 times 2, but rather 4 times 4, which would be 16. Yes. Does anybody know what the M stands for? Multiplication. So that would be the X. So the times 4. These are all, here, I'll make this a little easier. These are all separate, by the way. Not all in one lateral line. Okay, so that is the times 4. The D, again, division. You guys will be able to start to see the pattern. Just a little bit of review. That's my divided by 4. The A, addition, plus 4. And then the S, minus 4. There we go, minus 4. So we've got our parentheses, our exponents, our multiplication, our division, our addition, and our subtraction. Now what do we do with this? Well, while we know the individual parts of the equation, we have the parentheses with a number enclosed, 4 with the exponent, the times 4 divided by 4 plus 4 minus 4. How do we apply that to an expression or an equation? Let's see. Easier. Okay. So say we have a 4 in parentheses plus another parentheses with a 5 minus 3. Okay. Where do we begin? Well, first, we need to find our P. What is our P? The 4 in parentheses and the 5 minus 3 in parentheses. So, because the 4 is alone in the parentheses, we would just leave the 4 and bring it down, right? Okay, well, what about the 5 minus 3? Well, yes, that is subtraction in parentheses, and subtraction is later on in PEMDAS, because when you're using PEMDAS, one thing I should mention is we read left to right. We start with the P and then we go to the PEMDAS, the S, just like we would be reading a book. However, because the P is first, we would do any of the multiplication, division, subtraction, whatever, in the parentheses before we would do any of the other math outside the parentheses. Does that make sense? So while the P is in the beginning of the word, we take care of everything in the parentheses before we can move to the E. So for this case, 5 minus 3 is what? Say it with me, 2. So that would be the 2 that we got from our parentheses. Now because there's no exponents, no multiplication, division, but there is addition, we would next add the 4 and then add the 2, because that is our next step with the addition, which would give us the value of 6. So our answer in this case would be 6. Now let's try a little bit of a harder one. Now this is just the intro because we need to set the groundwork to be able to go into the associative and commutative properties. We probably won't be covering that until tomorrow's lesson. However, this is a precursor to what will be to come as we define what associative means and what commutative means in terms of the properties of equations and expressions. But in order to get there, we need to first review PEMDAS, which sets the groundwork for our parentheses, our exponents, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. All the fun stuff that will help us be able to understand the terms we are discussing. So just one more review problem before we move on. Let's do 4 times 5 minus 3 plus 2. Okay, where do we begin? Well, we recognize that there's parentheses here, so we would write out 4 times 5 minus 3 equals what? 2. Put that in our parentheses, plus 2. What's the next step? There's no e, but there is an m. So we would take the multiplying, which would be, in this case, the 4 times the 2. And what's 4 times 2? 8. So we do 8 plus 2. Now you can get rid of the parentheses here because we had already, the multiplication kind of cancels out the parentheses, so we just drop down to get our 8. And then what is our last step? What is the last multiplication sign or mathematics symbol, that we see? Yes, it is the addition, which would give us 10. Okay? You guys can stand up, pack up your things, and have a nice day. Thank you.